everyone to a presentation on fraud case studies. And you should select the language channel at the bottom of your screen because there is two simultaneous translation, English and Portuguese. So without further oh, is this working? Okay, yeah, good point. So at any rate, I'd like to introduce Nick Zacchea. Nick has a very extensive background in auditing and fraud detection and prevention, and he's going to share with us some of his experiences and guidance on fraud case studies. So, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Ray, and welcome and welcome. This is a kind of an interesting presentation. It talks about two specific types of fraud, two types of fraud that essentially are carried out by contractors. Contractors are not the most honest people that anyone wants to deal with. I've been dealing with them for longer than most of you are old. And my encounters with contractors and government contracting has been interesting, to say the least. So one of the things I want to stress is that contractors are in business to make money. They're in business to make money. They're not in business to serve the government. They're not in business to serve the people. They're in business to make money first and foremost. And so one of the things they attempt to do under every circumstance is maximize profits, and in many cases, maximizing profits contrary to good business practice and contrary to the law. And so, what these 2 hours are going to be devoted to is a discussion of at least two of the kinds of things that contractors do to maximize their profits. Contractors view government as having. Is there something wrong with the transmission? Is there everything okay?
Just a second, Nick. I'm gonna make a comment here that it is important. Pessoal, por favor, deixem seus microfones no modo mudo, ok? Porque senão a gente fica com problemas na transmissão. Por gentileza, pessoal, modo mudo. Nick, please go ahead.
Did everybody hear that, Livio?
Yeah, I believe so. The problem is there are some mics on, and so this is disturbing broadcasting. But go ahead. Thank you for your patience.
Just to pick up where I left off. In any case, contractors in dealing with the government believe the government, no matter at what level, federal, state, city, local, village, contractors think that the government has deep pockets. And it's not so much the government that has deep pockets, but it's the taxpayers. It's the people who pay the taxes that fund the government that eventually fund contractors. And so contractors look upon the government as a fairly lucrative business partner, business arrangement. Okay. Was there a question? Did somebody?
No. Mike, there are still some mics on. Sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
Okay. Please. All right. Okay. In any case, we're going to talk about two of the ways in which contractors defraud the government, and these are two real cases. These are two cases of the many cases I've been involved with, and so I think you're going to find the cases interesting. But more than that, I think that what you're going to do is you're going to come up with ways in which you can approach contract or procurement audit and maximize the effort you put into conducting those audits. What do we plan to discuss? We plan to discuss two types of fraud that occurred. Two types of fraud, two different audits, two different contractors, two different set of circumstances. We're going to discuss those particular cases. They aren't all the ways that contractors commit fraud, but these are two of the most prevalent ways. These are the two of the most common ways that they commit fraud. Why the audit was started? How did the auditors get involved in auditing these contracts? How come? What precipitated? What encouraged the auditors to look further into the contracts and conduct an in-depth audit? What were the steps that they took? What the auditor did to uncover what we call red flags. Red flags are indications of things occurring. We have red flags in every profession, every walk of life. We have red flags in audit, meaning that there is something that we believe might be wrong. May not be wrong, but we believe it might be wrong. You smell smoke, there might be a fire. You hear noise, it might be an accident. So in the noise, the smoke are red flags. Likewise, in audit, we have red flags. If we have an audit and a red flag, that precipitates the need to do a further investigation, to take another look, to execute some additional audit steps. Then we talk what is significant about the collection of evidence. Collection of evidence is probably the way in which auditors exist. If you are an auditor and you can't collect evidence and you don't know how to collect evidence and you don't know what evidence is, it'd probably be best for you to find another profession, because evidence is the cornerstone. Evidence is the foundation for the results of every audit. If you must collect evidence to demonstrate A, what you've done, and B, what you've found. And that evidence must be understandable. It must be convincing to somebody that you are presenting the results of your work to. So evidence collection is important. Evidence collection is something we're going to discuss with some degree of intensity. And then we're going to talk about what actually happened. What was the ultimate disposition of the auditor's findings? What resulted as a result of what the auditor did. The first technique we're going. You got it. Sorry, but slide won't change. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, the first a technique that first way in which fraud is committed is bid rigging. And this particular audit was done of a contract that was being executed by a major contractor at an airport here in the United States. And what that contractor basically did with the assistance with other contractors that that contractor was familiar with, was rig the bids to the government. Now, I should tell you this too. I need to remind you of this. Contractors are not essentially independent. Contractors know each other. Contractors congregate together. Contractors associate with each other. Even though they're competitors, they're in the same business. They belong to the same associations. They go to social gatherings. They go to social gatherings together. So it's foolhardy, it's silly to think that.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. Everybody's mic closed. We can't keep stopping. Close your mics. In any case, contractors know each other. It's foolhardy. It's silly. It's foolish to think that they don't get together. They are competitors, no question about that. Each one is concerned with maximizing the amount of money they make. But they also know each other. They go to social gatherings together. They belong to the same clubs. And so there's absolutely no reason to think why they should act independent. And bid rigging is a way in which they don't act independently for the purpose of maximizing the profits, not only of one contractor, but of many contractors. Now, what is bid rigging? By the way, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them now. Okay? Interrupt me and ask your question. What is bid rigging? Bid rigging is when somebody engages in bid rigging, they're engaging in fraud. Bid rigging, no matter what country I've been in, I've been 30 to 40 countries, bid rigging is always illegal. It's never legal. It's never legal to commit fraud against the government. It's a way that contractors act or engage in. It's a thing they engage in to enrich themselves, to maximize their profits. And that enrichment comes out of the government's pocket and it comes out of your pocket. So auditors basically are on the front lines. Auditors are suffering as a result of things like bid rigging. And so they should have a special interest. In conducting audits where they detect situations like that. Bid rigging in construction occurs when contractors get together to manipulate the bidding process. Now, we know what the bidding process is. It's supposed to deliver the lowest bid to the government, the lowest responsible bid, the bid that delivers the best value. That's what bidding is supposed to result in. So what contractors do, instead of submitting individual bona fide bids, what contractors do is they get together and they decide how they all should bid. They decide how they all should bid. And in deciding how they all should bid, the primary objective, the end result of deciding how they all should bid, is to maximize the profits, not of one contractor, but of all the contractors. And so what bid rigging does, it removes the competitive nature of competitive bids. It removes the competitive nature of competitive bids. And so when bid rigging takes place, there is no competition. Competition is essentially destroyed. And because competition is destroyed, the consumer, is defrauded. The customer thinks the price paid is the best value price, when in fact, what the customer gets is a price that has been manipulated and contrived and does not deliver the best value. Bid rigging can take a number of different forms. Bid suppression is one form. Bid rotation is another form. And cover pricing is yet another form. Bid rigging is essentially what the name implies. It's the rigging of bids, but it can be done in three different ways. The selection of the way, of course, depends on the contractors. It's the way in which they prefer to do it. It's the way in which they conspire, get together, and come up with a way to engage in bid rigging so as to defraud the government and not give the government best value for money. Let's talk about bid suppression for a moment. Bid suppression is when contractors agree either to not submit bids or to bid and withdraw their bids so that a specific contractor can be awarded the contract. Now that sounds silly. Why do they do that? Well, that specific contractor, because the other contractors either don't bid or withdraw their bids, that contractor then can basically bid anything that contractor wants. And generally speaking, that bid, in a situation where we have bid suppression, that particular bid is much higher than it should be. It's in fact not a competitive bid because A, there's no competition, and B, because the bid was developed in conspiracy with the other contractors. So how do the other contractors benefit? Well, the other contractors benefit because God bless you. because the winning contractor, because the bid that's accepted is so exorbitant, is so high, it's so unconscionably unreasonable, that contractor then is able to award subcontractors to the contractors that were part of the conspiracy. So subcontracts are awarded. When a specific contractor wins an award, that contractor, because the amount of the award is significantly high, it's not competitive at all, and there's plenty of money to go around, that contractor that gets the contract then either gives the other contractors that he or she is conspiring with, gives them subcontracts. So they share in those exorbitant profits, or that contractor this just then shares some of the profits, because the profits in a bid rigging situation are usually very, very significant. Second type, bid rotation. Bid rotation, like bid suppression, is fraud. Any bid rigging is fraud. It's different than bid suppression, but the results are essentially the same. And this is kind of this is a kind of a usual technique. You see this fairly often, and it's very difficult to detect unless you're a good auditor, unless you roll up your sleeves and you dig deeply. This is very difficult to detect. But the fact that you know it exists should give you the wherewithal, should give you the enough initiative to be able to recognize it when you see it, or at least look for it in a contracting situation. And so with bid rotation, well, imagine a number of contractors, 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever, number of contractors get together, they meet someplace, sometimes in one of the contractors' offices, or sometimes, as I found, in a restaurant, and they decide who's going to get the bid. They've already got invitations for bid. Bids have already been solicited. And so they get together. As I said before, they know each other. So they get together in a social circumstance. And what they do is they decide who's going to get the bid. So contractor A is picked to be the low bidder. And all the other contractors are going to submit high bids. Now, the low bid is really not a low bid. The low bid is unconscionably high. The low bid is very high, very high. So how does that contractor get the contract? Well, the other bidders submit bids that are even higher. So the contractor A, who just submitted this high bid, actually has a low bid. All the other contractors, their bids are significantly higher, and that was agreed upon. So they all know that the bids they're submitting are extremely high. They all know that. And they all know that one contractor is going to have a low bid, which is high enough, which is higher than it should be, but it's high enough to be able to share the profits with the other contractors. And so that contractor they all submit their bids. That contractor looks like that contractor has a low bid. In fact, it's not low. It's been conspired. It's not low. The government gets the bids, looks at all the bids, assesses, evaluates all the bids, looks for best value, and then selects the bid of the conspiring contractor. And that contractor, because the bid looks lowest of all the contractors that submitted bids, that contractor gets the bid, which is extraordinarily high. That contractor then either gives the other contractors subcontracts or shares some of the profits with those other conspiring contractors. Okay, is that clear? Sort of? Okay. Cover pricing, also a form of bid rigging and also illegal. Slightly different than bid suppression and bid rotation, but the result is essentially the same. One of the common features of bid rigging is that it involves a conspiracy. Contractors get together and they. Is that a question?
Não, não pode, mamãe tem reunião. Calma aí, tá? Não, Lucas. Não, agora não, tá bom? Espera aí.
Can I continue?
Sure, Nate.
Okay, thank you. So contractors get together and they conspire. And they arrange to submit high bids, as highest as possible, that look like best value bids. And they may, on the surface, they may appear to be best value, but they're higher than they should be. They're extremely high. They're high enough where everybody who's bidding can profit. So bidders conspire and arrange for the conspiring bidders to submit artificially high bids to distort the buyer's perception of competitive pricing. So all the bidders except one submit very high bids. The one bidder submits a low bid, also very high, higher than reasonably should be. The government selects that contract, which is higher than it should be, and pays a price they should not pay for the goods and services that they need. So 3 types. Let's take a look at this construction project, at this audit. So what about this contract? What's some of the background? Again, we've left a lot of details out. It would probably take us a week to discover every detail of this particular contract and every bit of what the auditors did. But what we're going to do is touch on the highlights. So a little background about this contract. It was for the major construction at an airport in the United States. The government, the airport authority, sent invitations to bid to about a dozen contractors for work involved at that particular airport. It was decided that the construction work would probably take about 2 years. So it was a pretty long contract, involved significant construction work at the airport. Of the dozen contractors that were solicited for bids, about 10 of the contractors actually submitted bids. 2 contractors did not. Okay, it doesn't sound unusual. The 10 bids were reviewed by the government, and the lowest responsible bidder was awarded the contract. Now the government, the procuring official, the person who solicited the bids, the person who's evaluating the bids, is looking for best value. And what the government sees are 10 bids, and it sees an array of bids, and it sees a low bid. And so the government looks at that bid, the government procuring official looks at that bid, and makes a decision. This is the best bid. That's the best bid. And it's going to deliver the best value for the government's money. The procuring official looks at all the other contracts, essentially doesn't see too much difference between each one of them, but sees that the one he or she is focusing on is the lowest bidder. Not only the best price, but the best value. And so that contractor is selected. The contracting official thinks that the contract is the lowest bid. The contractor thinks that the contract is the best contractor to select. The government thinks that they've done a good job in picking a contractor, and that the airport construction work will be done at the lowest possible price with the highest quality and value. Now, where's the audit involvement? Well, this particular audit organization had a selection process, had a way in which they selected projects for audit, a way in which they selected contracts for audit. And so there were 4 basic criteria that they used. Number one, they used size, the size of the contract. Size meaning the amount of money involved in the contract. That was one of the criteria they used. So this contract was significant in dollar amount based on the should cost estimate. Based on the bid, it was significant in dollar amount. The contract was complex. It involved a host, a lot of different elements, a lot of different aspects, a lot of different construction techniques. The contract was long in duration, 2 years. The contract had some significance because the construction work at the airport disrupted to some extent air traffic. And so that contract had to be done right, had to be executed correctly, and it had to be executed on time because of its significance, because it may be disrupting air traffic. And so there was significance, though. And of course, the cost. It was one of the highest value contracts that the auditors looked at. Now, of course, we all know now, because I've kind of alerted you to the fact that the cost is incorrect. We know that the cost has already been inflated. Why? Because the bids have already been rigged. So we know that the cost has been inflated. Okay, so in any case, based on those 4 criteria, or 5 criteria, that contract was selected for audit. I should tell you that the contract is selected, except that construction work had already started before the audit began. So construction work was underway. So this was an uncompleted contract. Construction work was underway, and it was for a significant amount of money, and it was an important contract in terms of its impact on air traffic operations. And so the audit work started. And the first thing that the auditors did was a risk assessment. Now, risk assessment, incidentally, everything that I discuss here is in compliance with the Brazilian audit standards. Everything I discuss here is in compliance with it. There's nothing that I discuss that's not in the standards. Now, you may not find what I say in the standards, but the principles that I'm discussing are fully discussed in the audit standards. That's number one. Number two, if you don't follow the audit standards, you're not doing an appropriate audit. In order to do an appropriate audit, in order to do a professional audit, you must follow the audit standards. If you don't follow the audit standards, then you're not doing a professional audit, and that audit cannot be relied on. The results of the audit can't be trusted if you don't do an audit in accordance with the standards. So again, everything I discuss is covered in the Brazilian audit standards. So one of the things that's covered is risk assessment. And executing the risk. Now, what the auditor does is look for red flags. What the auditor does, red flags don't mean something is wrong, but they're an indication that something might be wrong. They're an indication that you should look a little further to see what's behind that red flag. And so what the auditor did, and there were a lot of steps before this, what the auditor did was look at documents. What the auditor did was interview government personnel. What the auditor did was look at the records that the procurement official had at the government procurement office. And so one of the things the auditor looked at, again, this is construction. This has to do with bidding. This has to do with money. The government has to know how much something is going to cost. It has to know that because the government has a budgetary process. The government gets a certain amount of money to execute its responsibilities. And so if one of the responsibilities is to do some airport development, the government has to know how much approximately how much it's going to cost to submit a budget to get that money appropriated. And so in looking at, in executing the risk assessment, the first thing the auditor noted was that the contract award, the amount of money of the contract, the award, the bid, was significantly higher than what the government believed it should be. Significantly higher. So the government developed what is called a should cost. What should it cost? You encounter this in your everyday life. When you go to the store, you know what something should cost, or approximately what it should cost. And you go to buy something, and you look at the price, and you say, "Oh, it's too expensive." The reason it's too expensive is because it doesn't fit what you believe it should cost. And so the government is no different. When the government wants to buy something, it should know, and if it doesn't, that's another problem, but it should know how much what they want to buy should cost. So the auditor looked at the bid, the award, and determined that it was significantly higher than the government's estimate of what it should cost. And the auditor considered that to be a red flag. The auditor also noticed that not all the contractors solicited the bid actually submitted bids. I think we said 12 invitations for bid was sent out, and only 10 were returned. Not extremely unusual, not extraordinary, but the auditor at the time thought that why wasn't there 12 bids submitted? Why didn't those two bidders submit bids? Especially when the winning bid was higher than what the government believed it should be. The next thing during the risk assessment that the auditor noted was that the contractor who received the contract had never been a prime contractor on any other, never had experience in airport construction. Now, you recall, one of the things the auditor noticed before, the reason the contract was selected was because of the significance of the audit, of the construction work, the significance of the construction work. The construction work was done at a working airport, and so it had to be done carefully. It had to be done with regards to airport activities, and it had to be done. It had to be done on time. Excuse me. Had to be done on time. And so the auditor thought it was maybe unusual. We have not every contractor submitted a bid. The bid was higher than the government's should cost estimate. And the contractor who got the contract never did out contract work before, was a subcontractor, but never was a prime contractor on airport construction work. And so the auditor thought those red flags may indicate a problem. Are they problems? Not yet. The auditor doesn't see them as problems yet. The auditor sees them as leading to a potential problem. And so because the auditor concluded that there may be a potential problem, the auditor then developed an audit program. Audit programs simply are the steps the auditor wants to take next in light of what the risk assessment disclosed. So the auditor then wants to go a little further. The auditor wants to look at the contract more closely. Okay. Okay. And following up on the red flags, what did the auditor find? Okay. The auditor then took the government's should cost estimate and audited it. Now, we're all auditors. We know how to audit. You know, we've studied accounting. We know what a proposal should look like. And so the auditor looked at the government's should cost estimate. And what the auditor found was that the should cost estimate was reasonable. It was well done. It was well supported. The auditor could not find anything wrong with the government's should cost estimate. But what the auditor found was that the contract price, the low bidder, was 40% more than the should cost estimate. And so the red flag is continuing to get redder. Things are continuing to look worse. The problems are starting to mount. The auditor is being confronted with a situation that's requiring the auditor to do more work. And so, I'm sorry. Well, why don't we just ask the question? Yes, correct.
40%.
Okay. Well, of course, if it was 1 to 10%, it wouldn't be considered too high. If the should cost estimate was not properly prepared, that would raise another question. In this particular case, 40% was considered too high. It was considered too high because the should cost estimate was well prepared. If the should cost estimate was not well prepared, then 40% may not have been considered too high. So what I'm saying is too high depends on a number of circumstances. If it was 40% higher than the should cost estimate, but the should cost estimate was faulty, if the auditor audited it and found it was not well prepared, then the auditor would not have considered 40% too high. What the auditor would have done, or should have done, is made a quick and dirty determination as to what it should have been. Looking at the should cost estimate, if it was done properly, what would the should cost estimate look like? And if it was higher, of course, then the red flag got redder. So there's no criteria for higher. We know what higher means. And if we see it's higher, we look at the circumstances surrounding the situation, and then we make an audit judgment. In this particular case, the should cost estimate was well done. Notice it's an individual bullet. The should cost estimate was well documented. So it was good. The auditor thought it was good. And then when the auditor compared it to the bid, to the award, found it was 40% lower. Okay. Now, does that mean something is wrong? Not necessarily. Does that mean something could be wrong? Yes. As I said, the red flag got redder. Okay. So what should have been done by the government? So the government should have done that same thing. The government should have looked at that should cost estimate, that procurement official, and then looked at the bid and reconciled the two. Why is it so much higher? If the government had done that, the government itself, the procuring official, may have discovered that it looks like this bid has been rigged. But the government did not do that. So the disparity between the should cost estimate and the bid received and the award was never investigated, was never reconciled, was never assessed, was never analyzed by the procurement official. So essentially, the procurement officials messed up, made a mistake. They didn't do what they should have done. The auditor also found that all potential bidders were not invited to bid. Other bidders could have been solicited. Now, I think we said that there were 12 bids, 12 solicitations were sent out. We said that 10 were received, that 2 were not. Okay, what the auditor also found out was that there were other major construction companies that did construction work at airports within the state and within the multi-state region from state to state that did not get invitations for bid. So what the auditor concluded was more than 12 could have been sent out. More than 12 invitations for bid could have been sent out. The auditor went to a directory of construction firms that specialize in airport construction. The auditor called other procurement officials at other airports that have undergone airport construction and determined that there were other contractors that should have been solicited. So now the auditor steps back and looks at it was a good should cost estimate. The should cost estimate was 40% more than less than the bid. The disparity between the should cost estimate and the award amount was never reconciled by the government. The government didn't send out invitations to bid to every contractor that was qualified to submit a bid for airport construction. With regards to the two contractors that did not submit bids, the government did not follow up on them. The government didn't inquire, did you get a bid? Because maybe those two contractors would have submitted lower bids. But the fact that the government didn't follow up on those two non-responses, again, added to the contract, to the auditor's suspicion that something has gone wrong. Now the auditor is beginning to develop a sense that something is wrong with this contract. Something is very wrong with this contract because nothing is going right. Nothing that the auditor touches, nothing that the auditor looks at makes as much sense as it should. The auditor looked at procurement procedures for best value. And what the auditor found is that when there is a significant difference, and here we get back to that notion of significance, was there's a significant difference between the should cost estimate and the contractor's bids. When there is that difference, the procurement procedures, in order to get best value, procurement procedures require that a resolicitation be considered.
Nick, do you
Hey,
need
we
to
sent,
move to the next slide?
sorry?
I think you need to move to the next slide.
Well, that was the last bullet, Ray.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, right? Take a look at the last bullet. Government officials did not consider a resolicitation. Okay, which is what the procedures required them to do when there was a difference between the should cost estimate and the bids. That was the last slide. Okay. Okay, follow on to red flag. Again, these are all red flags. These are all indicators that something has gone wrong. The auditor then reviewed the background of the contractor. The auditor is now digging deeper. The auditor is now executing additional audit steps. The auditor is finding in pursuing these red flags that each time he initiates or she initiates a pursuit of one of these issues, the auditor finds out that something was not done right or something was done incorrectly. And so the auditor now begins to look at the contractor. Okay. And the auditor reviews the background of the contractor that received the award and the background of the contractors that were solicited. Again, the contractor that got the award was never a successful bidder on any airport construction project in the region, not only in the state, but in the multi-state regional area. The auditor called the two contractors that did not submit bids. Remember, I said there were 12 solicited, there were 10 responses, 2 did not respond. The auditor got in touch with those two contractors and interviewed them and said, why didn't you respond? And they said they didn't get invitations to bid. They were not solicited. Okay. Again, the auditor, every time the auditor asks a question, every time the auditor executes an audit step, the auditor finds that something is wrong. And what that is doing is contributing to the auditor's tentative conclusion that I need to take more audit steps. I need to execute more audit steps. because nothing that I'm touching seems like it was done properly. Okay, the auditor also found that some of the other bidders, the losing bidders, the bidders that submitted the high bids, those losing bidders were awarded subcontracts by the successful bidder. So those who submitted bids that were higher than the winning bid, those losing subcontractors actually, in fact, won. They were winners. They got subcontracts. The two bidders who said that they didn't get invitations also got subcontracts. So as we say, the plot is thickening. It's looking, every step we take, every step the auditor takes leads the auditor to the conclusion that, number one, something has gone terribly wrong, and then I need to continue to look into it. Okay. Because of these preliminary disclosures, this is all preliminary information. These are all audit steps taken to determine the direction of the subsequent audit. These are all audit steps of a preliminary nature. What they do is inform the auditor. They give the auditor a sense of what he or she is auditing. Again, all of these steps, this risk assessment, this preliminary work is all provided for in the audit standards. So the next thing the auditor decided to do was to test internal controls. The internal controls, of course, govern the procurement process. Okay, so internal controls cover a lot of things, including the solicitation and receipt of bids. What the auditor found was that there were few internal controls in place, and the few that were in place were not being followed. So it looked like the internal controls with regards to procurement, the internal controls with regards to their ability to help assure best value for money, those controls were weak. And the controls that were in place, the weak controls, were not generally followed. So what were they not followed for? Not followed for the solicitation, receipt, and analysis of bids, which is essentially the procurement process. The solicitation, receipt, and analysis of bids. The controls were not being followed. In addition, the preparation of the should cost estimate was not carefully monitored, not carefully attended to, not carefully looked at. And so it was not used properly. The SCE should cost estimate was not looked at. Had it been looked at, the government would have immediately discovered the 40% differential, but it was not looked at. It was not used. So the errors are being compounded. Each error is compounding, is creating another error, and the errors in the aggregate are creating what looks like a very serious situation. Because of that, the auditor then said, "I need to do additional in-depth audit work." Okay. Let me see. Okay, additional. Okay. The in-depth audit work, resulted in the disclosure of a number of significant audit findings. Okay. Number one is what we just discussed: internal control weaknesses. Whatever the auditor finds based on his or her audit work, to a large extent, is going to be the result of internal control weaknesses. Perhaps if the internal controls, which again is covered in the audit standards, if the internal controls are not being adhered to, if they had been adhered to, this bid would have been recognized as being unconscionably high, and that contractor may not have gotten the contract. So internal controls were weak. Significant management deficiency that, of course, needed to be corrected. Now, because the internal controls were weak, the lack of internal controls or the misapplication of internal controls or the weak internal controls caused other things to happen. They created the disparity between the should cost estimate and the bids received that should have been analyzed. Internal controls require they be analyzed, and they were not analyzed. So there's a serious question as to why the bids were not analyzed. Why the bids were not analyzed, why the should cost estimate, because of its difference, was not looked at together with the bids that was submitted. In addition, the procedures required that bids be resolicited because of the difference between the SCE and the bids received. So the procedures required, the internal controls required that if a bid is significantly different than the SCE, and here we go, significantly different, depends on the circumstances, that the resolicitation of bids should be considered. Why did we get such a high bid? 40%, 50%, 60%, almost twice as much. Okay, we need to resolicit. We need to look at what we're asking for and resolicit, because the bids we're getting don't conform to what we think they should conform to. Okay. In addition, government officials did not solicit all potential bidders. We found many potential, the auditors found many potential bidders that could have been solicited, bidders that had done airport construction work, and they could have submitted lower bids, theoretically. Because of these findings, the auditor decided to conduct an in-depth examination of very specific aspects of the procurement, okay, and develop some additional audit steps, okay, based on the results of the auditors. Now, these were all red flags that the auditor was following up on. The auditor then developed an audit program with steps directed at the adequacy of the bid solicitation and the award process. Let's see what the auditor found. Okay. The auditor found that the bid solicitation process was inadequate. Okay. Invitations for bid were not sent to all possible bidders. Bidders were excluded by the government because the government said
I'd like to make a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it possible now?
Yes, sir.
About the minimal 3 prices. In Brazil, there is a culture. We can make just 3 prices to have estimate cost prices, because the law tends to talk about the minimal 3 prices. I'd like to know if in United States legislation, the number 3 is not considered a magic number, just 3 sufficient enough to make a cost estimate. Thank you.
Okay, if I understand the question, we there to my knowledge, there is no such process in the United States, to my knowledge. Yeah. No, we do not, to my knowledge.
There's no maximum.
The principle is to get competitive bids, whatever that. In some cases, there's only one firm, there's only one contractor who can do the work in some cases, and so the contract is negotiated differently than if there were a number of contractors that could do the work. So we don't have a rule of 3, to my knowledge, and we try to get competitive bids, as many as is feasibly possible, to make the process competitive. In some cases, it can't be competitive. in some cases, we could never ask for three in the government because there aren't three contractors who do certain types of work. Some work is highly specialized, and there's relatively few contractors who can do that work.
But Nick, we don't limit it to three, right?
Right. No, we don't limit it to three. Limited? No, of course not. No, no, no. No, we try to get as much competition as possible. And that's a principle of that's competition. That's competition. Soccer league, you don't have two teams. You have many teams in a soccer league. I don't know. Do we answer the question? Is the question answered, sir?
Yes, it's answered. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. So what did the auditor find when looking at the bid solicitation process? The auditor found that invitations were were not sent to all possible bidders. Okay, bidders were actually excluded. There were bidders that could have bid, bidders that did airport construction work that were excluded because they didn't always respond to bids. Okay, and so the auditor wonders why they don't always respond to bids. In addition, bidders who very often do not respond to invitations for bid usually received subcontractors from winning bidders. And so the circle is closing. The auditors then went out to the construction site and they observed that construction vehicles at the construction site belonged to non-bidders as well as losing bidders. So bidders who didn't bid and bidders who lost were given subcontracts. In addition, the auditors also interviewed construction workers, construction supervisors, and it was determined that they actually worked for losing bidders and for bidders who did not submit bids. So here we have a situation where 10 bidders submitted bids. The winning bid was 40% higher than the should cost estimate. Invitations to bid were sent out to 12 firms. Many of those firms got subcontracts from the prime contractor who submitted a bid 40% higher than the should cost estimate. Again, the auditor is slowly or quickly drawing a conclusion that there are problems, serious problems. Okay, the auditor then read the contract. Okay, which is, again, an important part of the audit process, to read the contract, read it carefully. You know, contracts are sometimes many, many pages long, 100 pages long. But the contractor is responsible for everything that's in the contract, everything that is said in the contract, in the signed contract between the government and the contract, everything that's in the contract is the responsibility of the contractor, everything. And so the auditor should know what the contractor is responsible for. And the only way the auditor can know that is by reading the contract. So in reading the contract, no, let's not skip ahead. Okay, noted that bid solicitation process required that bidders sign a non-collusive bidding certification, which is enforceable under law. Now, I don't know if you have that in Brazil. If you don't have that in Brazil, you should have it in Brazil. So in the United States, we have a requirement that procuring officials put into effect that those kinds of construction contracts were non-collusive contracts, that there was no collusive bidding. There was no, in effect, that there was no bid rigging that took place. A contractor is required in submitting the bid to sign that certification. That no, I did not talk to any other contractors. No, I did not sit down and decide who should get the contract. No, we did not sit down and decide what the high bid and low bid should be.
Nick,
So every contractor submitting a bid has to sign that certification. Okay, that certification was referred to in the contract, and the auditor, of course, expected to see it and saw it.
Nick, we do have an anti-corruption clause that has to be on our contracts.
Okay, does it refer to bid rigging?
Can't quite
Specifically.
remember.
What it should refer to collusive bidding specifically. To say again, I don't know what it says in your contracts, but to say that your bid is free from corruption is not really significant. To say that you submitted an honest bid is not really significant.
Okay.
Because there's no way to hold somebody accountable for that. It would take a month of Sundays. It would take forever to hold somebody accountable for something like that. Whereas in the United States, this non-collusive bidding certification is a very specific document that's signed by the contractor. If there's nothing else, that's there. So again, I'd look at that provision in your contract law, and I would see whether or not it's really adequate to prevent non-collusive bidding. If it's not, there's a problem. It's a problem. And you don't need, it says enforceable under law. There's civil law and there's criminal law. You don't need an act of the legislature to come up with that kind of a regulation, that kind of a rule. That can be a contractual matter. You can put that in a contract and require a contractor to sign it. Once the contractor signs it, that provision of the contract is civilly enforceable. May not be criminally enforceable, but it's civilly. You didn't fulfill the terms and conditions of the contract. Okay. And that's relatively important, if you're dealing with bid rigging. It's relatively important because if it's not in the contract, if nobody acknowledges the possibility of it existing, then it's hard to hold somebody accountable for it. Okay. The certification said that the bid was developed independently and without collusion, consultation with any competitors. Okay. That was in every one of the 10 bids that was submitted. And it was signed by every one of the contractors, which means the contractors said that we didn't get together. We did not get together and collude and determine who should get the contract. In addition, the auditors found that the two contractors that said they didn't get bids were lying. They didn't tell the truth. And those two contractors also got subcontracts. So now we have a number of inconsistencies, not only in the records, but in the stories we're being told by the contractors. The two bidders who said they did not receive invitations for bid actually did receive invitations. They were electronically sent to them. The auditors determined that. And they also received subcontracts from the winning bidders. So every one of the 12, just about every one of the 12 got subcontracts from the winning bidder. They all shared in the work. Okay, next thing the auditor did was compare the bids. And so the auditor got the 10 bids out and looked at each one of them, compared one to the other. And the auditor found that many of the losing bids, as well as the winning bid, had many similarities and identical details. The cost of estimates for components of the bids were identical from bid to bid. The bill of materials, for example, the unit prices and the volume of some of the materials were identical from bid to bid. It appeared to the auditor as if the bids were all prepared at the same time by the same people, and they were. Okay, each one of the bids was dated and mailed on the same day. Okay, this bid rigging activity was not done with any degree of wisdom. Okay, they made a lot of mistakes. Each bid package was mailed on the same day and received on the same day. The electronic bids sent out were also sent on the same day as the mailed bids. So all the bids that were received were basically looked like it's an awful coincidence, not a probable coincidence. Looked like they were all orchestrated. Looked like there was collusion. Looked like they got together and agreed on what they should and should not do. And again, the auditor found out that the winning bidder never received an airport construction award. Why? Because that bidder's bids were always too high. Always too high. Okay, so the noose is tightening, the circle is tightening, the evidence is becoming more and more concrete that there is an issue, there is a problem that needs to be addressed. Okay, each submitted bid was examined and found to include. Now, what did the evidence? What did the evidence point to? Each submitted bid was examined and found a signed certification that the bid was prepared independently and without collusion. Each bid. So each one of those 12 contractors, 10 contractors, signed that statement. The auditor verified that. In addition, the auditor also interviewed the procurement official. The procurement official said, yes, that certification was in every bid. And if it was not, every submission. And if it was not, the bid or the submission would be rejected. So now the auditor is pretty much convinced at this point that there was a probability of fraud. It looked like fraud has been committed. It looks like bid rigging and the law may have been violated. And what did the auditor present in concluding that the probability of fraud existed? And by the way, a determination of let me go back for a couple of seconds to no, I'm not going to go back in slides. Let me just say this. What the auditor did in pursuing the possibility of fraud before the auditor came to this conclusion is all covered in the Brazilian audit standards. When an auditor determines or decides or opines, has an opinion that something is wrong, that a fraud may be occurring, the auditor, in accordance with the Brazilian audit standards, has a responsibility to do what this auditor did. This auditor, these auditors, or a number of them, these auditors were using the exact same standards as the Brazilian audit standards, almost identical. And those standards required the auditor to do what the auditor did, to come up with this conclusion. And so the auditor concluded that there was a probability of fraud. It was not definitive. All the auditor needs to do is come up with a reasonable suspicion. I think fraud may have occurred. That reasonable suspicion can be validated by discussions with the auditor's colleagues, by discussions with the auditor's supervisor. Do you agree? Take a look at my evidence. Do you agree that there's a possibility that fraud may have occurred? And then let's look at what I'm asking you to look at. I'm asking you to look at the many similarities, the identical details among each of the bids of the losing bidders, as well as the winning bidder. Do you think that looks like fraud may have occurred? Okay, the cost estimates for components of the bids were identical from bid to bid. Not all of them, many of them were identical from bid to bid. Do you think that supports my conclusion that fraud may have occurred? All the bids had the same mailed and received dates. Each bid package was mailed on the same day, and received by the government on the same day. Okay. In addition, the bids that were submitted electronically were also sent on the same date as the mailed bids. So I ask you, do you think there's a probability that fraud may have occurred? And so the auditor draws that conclusion. Fraud may have occurred. Okay. The auditor concluded that there was a probability of fraud against the government, bid rigging, and the law may have been violated. The conclusion was supported by the following audit evidence or audit determinations. None bidders received subcontracts. In addition to these findings, there were other findings. None bidders received subcontracts. Losing bidders received subcontracts. Historically, the winning bidder never received an airport construction award because that contractor traditionally had bids that were always too high. And so the auditor believed, based on the application of common law elements, which we're going to discuss next, that many of these elements were in evidence in the findings, in the auditor's findings. At that point, because the auditor concluded that there was a probability that fraud existed, audit work was suspended and consultations with law enforcement officials were initiated. Law enforcement officials in Brazil, for example, based on our discussions with law enforcement officials, indicate that they're very willing and very able to discuss these kinds of situations with you. Okay, the public prosecutors in particular. So audit work was suspended and consultations with our equivalent of the public prosecutors were initiated. Okay, now I mentioned 9 elements of law, and these are the 9 elements. Okay, when you're collecting evidence of what you think might be possible fraud, this is the kind of evidence that you should focus on to draw your conclusion. Now, it's not necessary to collect evidence for each one of these 9 elements. What is necessary for you to collect as much evidence for as many of these elements as enable you to draw a conclusion that the possibility of fraud existed. So let's quickly look at these 9 elements. Representation of fact, a false representation. The representation must be material. The false fact, the presenter must know the fact is false. In other words, you can't commit fraud by mistake. You got to commit fraud intentionally, and that's element number 4. The person who represents the false fact must intend that the false fact be relied on. The injured party, in this case, the government, must not know the fact is false. The injured party, the government, must rely on the fact. The injured party, again, the government, must have a right to rely on the fact. And number 9, the government must suffer a loss as a result of the misrepresentation. So auditors use the collection of as many of these 9 elements to enable them to conclude that the possibility of fraud exists. Okay, let's look at this specific case. The bidders represented facts. Facts, certified bids, no collusion. The representations were false. The bids were not independently prepared and submitted. Third item, the difference between the government's should court estimate and the award was material, 40%. It wasn't 1%, it wasn't 2%, it was material. The bidding contractors intended the government to act on the bid. The bid was awarded. So the bid was submitted, so it was awarded, so it would be awarded. The government had no way of knowing whether the bids were rigged. Why? Because of poor internal controls. The government relied on the bidding contractors. The government took the bids, didn't do any assessment, didn't do any evaluation, and accepted the bids, made a decision to award. the government had a right to do that. The government had a legal right. The government was the contracting official. Okay, and the government was following legal procedures, codified archived procedures. And finally, the government would suffer. The government would pay for the work performed. It agreed to under the contract. So the government is going to wind up paying for these improprieties, for these illegal actions. Okay, there's 2, 6, 8 of these 9 elements were evident in the auditor's collection of evidence. 8 of these 9 elements. At that point, the work was turned over to law enforcement officials. Okay, so what happened? The auditor stopped work and consulted with the organization's legal counsel. Okay, which again is provided for in your audit standards. Okay, legal counsel said it looks like you have probable fraud. And so a consultation then were held with prosecuting attorneys that would bring the case, lawyers that would bring the case before a judge. As a result of this particular case, the perpetrators, 12 of them, were convicted of fraud against the government in court. Now, what did the auditor do? The auditor continued the audit and recommended significant strengthening of what? The internal controls. The auditor recommended increased training and supervision of procurement personnel. In addition, and this is a law in the United States, the contract was declared null and void because it was awarded based on deception and fraudulent bid submission. So none of the contractors got paid for anything that they did. The contract was null and void. Okay, that concludes case number 1. Any questions about anything that we talked about? Any comments or concerns? No questions? Okay. The second kind of fraud that contractors commit is product substitution. Now, I hate to break the news to you, but probably most of you have been victims of product substitution. Okay, you've heard of switch and bait. You go to the store to buy something that you think is reasonable in price, that's on sale, and you find out that it's not available, that you wind up purchasing something else of a lesser quality. Or you buy something and you think it's of high quality, and in fact, it's of low quality. And so contractors do that. And this is a case where a contractor was supposed to put down pipes to a village. This is not in the United States, to a remote village that had relied on well water and in-ground sewage system. They were going to place pipes into this village and carry potable water, clean water to the village, as well as carry wastewater out to a wastewater disposal facility. Okay, a little bit about product substitution fraud. Product substitution fraud occurs when a contractor or supplier intentionally, again, the word intentionally, you can't do it by mistake, intentionally supplies goods and services that do not comply in all material respects. Remember, we talked about the 40% higher than the SCE material respects with contract specifications. Product substitution is intended to increase profitability for the contractor or for the service provider. Product substitution has been detected, in my experience and others, for expired food and medicine. Okay, the U.S. military purchased food from a contractor that was expired. The U.S. military thought they were getting food that was fresh, when in fact the expiration dates on the food was packaged food. The expiration dates on the food had been changed by the contractor. Okay. Defective and used aircraft parts. The U.S. government contracted for aircraft repair, and replacement of parts were supposed to have been new parts. What was the contractor doing? The contractor was refurbishing old parts and replacing the parts with used parts, contrary to the contract. Okay, not following material specifications in bridge construction. One case we had in the United States that Ray and I talked about resulted in a bridge collapse and several fatalities. So product substitution is extremely common and something that auditors and procurement officials have to be concerned about. Why? Because you're not getting value for money. Value for money is not being obtained. It's not the result of the contract. You're getting less value. In this case, the contract is for the placement of potable water and wastewater pipes. Okay, invitations for bid were sent to several major. Sure, yes, sure, by all means. Okay. Yes, sir. They were part of the conspiracy. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Yes, I I did not follow the case beyond what I discussed with you. However, we do have a procedure, and it would be my sense that that contractor would be debarred, would not be eligible for government contracts hereafter based on this conviction, because that's one of the things that contracting officials are supposed to do, is check the bidder debarment list. And if a bidder is debarred, the bidder does not get an invitation to bid and can't engage in government contracts. So while I didn't follow this case, I'm still not following it, but I didn't follow this case completely through beyond the conviction. I'm sure these contractors were debarred. With respect to paying back the money that was paid to the contractors, the contract, my recollection, the contract was a contract that called for partial payment based on percent of completion. So the contractor wasn't paid, and the subcontractors were not paid for the entire contract. They were only paid for the work they did. So whatever work they did, the contract was declared null and void, and whatever work they did, whatever payments they were made, would have to be returned to the government, and the government would have to initiate legal action against them to get the money back. Does that answer the question? Is that question answered? Could you ask? Go ahead. Excellent. Okay, the answer. Go ahead. Okay, just to comment on even it doesn't, even if the should cost SCE, even if the SCE is the same as the winning bid, it does not mean that collusion did not take place. It does not mean that. Don't be fooled by that bit of information. Okay, the should cost estimate and the winning bid are similar. That does not mean that there was not collusion. Does not mean that at all. For example, we talk about contract change orders. I'll submit the lowest bid, which is the highest bid I can possibly submit. Then after I get the contract, I'll rely on change orders. And I've seen that. I rely on change orders. to increase the price. So don't be fooled by the fact that the price, the award amount, it matches the should cost estimate. Don't be fooled by that. And what was the other part of the question? The other part, I think I answered it, but okay. No, unless it's prohibited by the contract. The contractor is allowed to subcontract unless it's specifically prohibited by contract terms. The contractor may not know who the subcontractors will be when the contract is finally awarded and signed. And the government does not require the contractors to submit the names of the subcontractors. And this is a problem in the United States. In the United States, we have a access to records clause, which means that anybody who has a contract with the U.S. government must allow that contract to be audited. And sometimes that access to records clause does not include subcontractors. And so occasionally subcontractors, access to subcontractor records are excluded. And so it's wise when we have an access to records clause to also include in that clause subcontractors and suppliers. Okay. Okay, good. All right. Okay, so here's the contract. Invitations were bid, sent to several major construction firms. Placement of 2 lines of pipes. Okay, we know what pipes are. One to carry potable water to the community. Community was a rural community, and the other to carry wastewater away from the community to a process facility. Sounds like a relatively simple, uncomplicated contract. The contract required that each pipeline was to be placed along a road leading into the village, below the surface of the road shoulder, on opposite sides of the road, a specific number of meters below the ground. So the contract was relatively specific as to how these pipes should be placed. In addition, the contract said that the price was to be stainless steel of a specific grade, because the government engineers said that stainless steel pipes don't corrode, don't rust. They're rust resistant. And because they're being used to carry water on a regular basis, they're more resistant to corrosion. And so we want the contractor to supply stainless steel pipes. Excuse me. The contract was a completed contract at the time of the audit. And so the contract was selected, and it was determined that the contract had already been completed, that payments had already been made. Okay, but it was selected for audit anyway. The auditor did, again, a risk assessment. Again, standard operating procedure. It's found in the standards manual. The auditor, in this case, looked immediately at the internal controls. This is a construction project. And so there's certain things that internal controls in terms of procurement should be observed or should be followed. And the auditor look for example, a final inspection report, like the job is finished, so let's take a look at the government that's paid the contractor. So did the government look at the work done and say we should pay them? And there was no final inspection report, and there should have been. Okay. In addition, the contract called for the contractor to cooperate with the government and allow the government periodic inspections of the construction work. And the government, whether they made those periodic visits to the construction work while it was ongoing or not, whether they made those visits, reports of those visits should have been a matter of record. Each visit to the construction site should have been archived, should have been documented. And the auditor couldn't find any periodic inspections. Okay. The auditor couldn't find any reason, any documentation to indicate that that it was working. Okay, the government didn't find out whether the water was actually working, whether the water was being delivered, whether the wastewater was actually being transported to the wastewater facility. Government didn't determine whether the user was satisfied. Okay. In addition, the auditor couldn't locate any reports which indicated that the procurement officials inspected any of the materials used in the project. So there was virtually a I think because it was, I was a consultant on this audit. I think because it was a completed audit and relatively uncomplicated, I think the government thought that it would be a relatively simple contract to complete, and so perhaps they didn't pay as close attention to it as they should have. Okay, so there was no inspection reports that should have. Internal controls require that you inspect what you get. You look at what you buy. Okay, you don't buy something. You don't buy a house without looking into it, without walking inside the house. That's what the government did. Government paid for something without examining it. Okay. The auditor then concluded or determined that procurement officials did not perform a final inspection. We found no reports. Okay, did you do a final inspection? The answer was no. So the auditor corroborated what the auditor found in the file. Okay. Periodic inspections during construction were not performed. The auditor confirmed that. The auditor confirmed, based on the records, that nobody checked with the people in the village that the pipes were working, that they were getting water and waste was being removed satisfactorily. The auditor determined, based on the discussions, that the procurement officials did not determine whether or not every contract provision was being complied with or had been complied with by the contractor. Okay. And the piece de resistance is the auditor could not locate any reports that indicated that the materials used in the project had been inspected. Now, the materials, that is the sum and substance of the project, the pipes. It's not the digging up of the ground, it's the pipes. And the government procurement officials never bothered to look at them. Okay, based on the results of that follow-up of those red flags, the auditors wrote an audit program, again, required by the audit standards. And those steps were directed at assessing whether the project complied with the terms of the contract, all the terms, right? Contract is required to comply with every single term of the contract. Otherwise, the contractor should not get paid. And whether the objective of the contract, the delivery of clean water and the removal of wastewater, was actually happening, was being accomplished. Okay, some of the steps are now follow. Let's take a look. Okay, what did the auditor do? The auditor visited the community that the project intended to serve, went out to the village with the audit team and talked to people. You know, how's it going? Are you satisfied with the water? And what the auditors found out, that there were increased cases of gastrointestinal distress. There were no waterborne diseases like cholera, typhoid, thank God, or hepatitis, but there were other diseases, other gastrointestinal distress that were occurring. In addition, officials indicated that people were complaining about the taste of the water. Now, that may be because they were drinking well water before, and now they're drinking water supplied by a water processing facility. Okay, but the auditor recorded that. In addition, laboratory tests were taken, and it was determined that the water, in many cases, was below drinking water standards. There are standards for drinking water. The laboratory tests taken of this water indicated they were below standards. And so the auditor corroborated and documented this information. It's good evidence. It's evidence to indicate that there's something wrong. Just like with the airport construction, there is something wrong. In addition, the auditor hypothesized. The auditor had sort of a hunch or a guess. He said that because these situations, these events seem to have materialized after the pipeline was installed, that the pipeline and the conditions may be connected. Again, another red flag. Okay, so what did the auditor do? The auditor then developed additional audit steps that focused on the contractor's performance. Now the auditor is looking at what the contractor did. The auditor looked at the contractor's books and records. The auditor visited the construction site, the site where the pipes was to have been laid. A review of the contractor's construction records, project records. Again, there was an access to records clause in the contract. When the auditors looked at the contractor's records, what the auditors found or didn't find was that stainless steel pipes were never purchased. The auditors in the contractor's procurement records could not find the purchase of stainless steel pipes. What the auditors did find is the purchase of steel pipes in a quantity which matched the engineering drawings of the pipeline to be laid. So while no stainless steel pipes were purchased, as far as the contractor's records revealed, steel pipes were actually purchased that were sufficient for the project. In addition, the auditors found that the contractor billed the government for stainless steel pipes and certified that that billing was true. It was a certification on the billing that the contractor supplied stainless steel pipes. In addition, the auditors found that the contractor's labor, material, equipment rental costs were lower than the should cost estimate. Now, this is kind of interesting. The auditor got a fixed price contract, and the auditor is spending a lot less money than anticipated. The auditor is then making, the contractor is making a lot more money. The contractor is getting paid at an agreed upon price that essentially conformed to the should cost estimate, but the contractor is not incurring costs that are close to the should cost estimate or close to the bid. And so the labor and material costs were much lower than the should cost, or half, or approximately half. In addition, the date and the number of days estimated for the contract completion were less than the government estimated, as reflected in the should cost estimate. So it appears, forget about the fact that no stainless steel pipes were were purchased. It appears as though the contractor is doing a fantastic job, is making a lot of money. It's taking less time, the material costs are less, the rental costs were less, and the job is getting finished much more quickly. That's what the auditor is finding. Okay, so.
A question.
Yes, sir.
If I understood okay, I think it was made acquisition of stainless steel pipes, but not for that specific project. Am I correct?
No, sir. The stainless steel pipes were part of the contract specifications. they were for that project. The stainless steel pipes were supposed to have been placed in accordance with the terms and conditions of that project, and of course, in accordance with the engineering specifications. So the stainless steel pipes were specified in the contract. You recall I mentioned the government engineers preferred stainless steel pipes because they are less subject to corrosion. So they wanted stainless steel pipes, and they last a lot longer than steel pipes or even clay pipes. Okay, does that clarify that? Yes. Okay.
I have asked about it because I think in anything it is said it was made acquisition of stainless steel, and so I was thinking it was for other projects, not for that project, but it was not this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, the stainless steel was specifically for that project. That's correct. Specifically for that project. That was what the contractor was required to supply. That was what the contract specifications called. That was what the invitation for bid specifies. Yeah, and that was what the government wanted. Okay. Okay. What else did the auditor do? It also developed other audit steps that focused on the contractor's performance and a visit to the construction site. So now the auditors are at the construction site. Okay, now to get back to the question that was just asked, the contract required the placement of 2 lines of pipe, one on the eastbound side, one on the westbound side of the road. It was a two-lane road, one on one side, one on the other side. One of the pipes was to carry potable water into the village, and the other was to carry wastewater out of the village to a waste processing facility. The pipes were supposed to be situated along a road below the surface of the road on opposite sides. The contract was clear. And those pipes, again, the contract was clear. Those pipes were to be stainless steel. And so the auditors visited the construction site. Visit to the construction site, the purpose of which is to collect evidence. Evidence collection is required in the audit standards. There is no standard for the collection of audit evidence. Okay, there are 4 characteristics of audit evidence that are specified in the standards, but evidence can be virtually comprised of, interview, a document, physical evidence, and observations. So evidence can be basically anything, but generally evidence fits in to the 4 categories that I just mentioned. And so the auditor's visit to the construction site was the collection of evidence, in addition to the other work that they did. And what did the auditors find when they visited the construction site? The auditors found, and again, the auditors are not construction experts. The auditors make observations based on their knowledge and experience. Excuse me. Based on their knowledge and experience. And all they can report on in terms of evidence is what they see and what they collect. And so what the auditors saw was that only one side of the road appeared to have been the site of a construction project. Okay, no vegetation was visible on the ground, and the ground appeared to have been recently disturbed. So it looked like there had been work on one side of the road. On that same side of the road, what the auditors noticed and made a record of is that the disturbed ground appeared moist, appeared wet. Okay, the auditors then crossed the road. The other side of the road did not appear to have been the site of construction activity. The ground did not appear to have been disturbed. There were bushes, there were trees, there was vegetation on that side, as if that it had not been excavated. The other side, of course, was disturbed. It looked like it had been excavated. Now, that's an audit to observation. May or may not be the conclusion that the auditor is tentatively drawing may or may not be true, but it's an observation. It's the collection of evidence that the auditor uses to confirm or to validate what the auditor believes to be the ongoing situation. Okay, next slide. Okay, the auditor developed audit steps focused on the contractor's performance. The auditors then went, okay, they went to the village, went to the construction site, they went through the contractor's records, and now they're going through the contract. Now they're going through the contractor's suppliers. Now, the contractor's suppliers have no legal responsibility to cooperate with the auditors. They have no legal response, at least in the United States, no legal responsibility. The audit institution can make it difficult for a contractor or for a supplier, can make it difficult for a supplier, but a supplier has no responsibility to cooperate. However, in my experience, 99 times out of 100, 999 times out of 1,000, suppliers of contractors cooperate. They don't not cooperate. They're only too willing to help. And so the auditors then went to the supplier, the material supplier, and they inquired about stainless steel pipes. The auditors don't know about stainless steel pipes. Auditors are not metallurgical experts. They don't know. So they ask an expert, what about stainless steel pipes? And the supplier said, oh, stainless steel pipes are much more expensive than steel pipes, much more. Okay, in addition, they require unique welding techniques to join them. They're not joined together like clay pipes or steel pipes. Special welding technique. Got to be an expert. But on the other hand, stainless steel pipes last much longer than steel pipes. They're corrosion resistant, whereas steel pipes rust and corrode more quickly. Now, you remember I said that's what the government said. That's what the government engineers said. And that's what caused those requirements to be put into the contract. So the auditor now is corroborating all of the information that he has collected so far. And then, as we say, the noose is tightening. Okay, the pudding is getting thick. The auditor is beginning to focus on something that looks like something went seriously wrong. Okay, in addition, the vendor, the supplier, the contractor rented equipment from this supplier and returned it months before it was due to be returned. Okay, equipment used to dig trenches was rented, and the contractor anticipated that it would be used for about a year, but it wasn't used for a year. It was used for less than a year, and the contractor returned it before it was actually due to be returned, which means the contractor used it less. Okay. The supplier also said that all pipe welds tend to leak over time. All pipe welds tend to leak over time. Okay, again, the auditor is not an engineer. The auditor is not an expert in steel pipes or stainless steel pipes, but the supplier is. And so the auditor made a record of that. That's evidence. But what the supplier also said is that there are X-ray inspection tools that you can use, said this to the auditor, that you can use to detect when pipes leak underground, to detect faults in underground water pipes. So now the auditor knows, without digging up the location, the auditor knows that maybe a leak can be detected. Maybe that can indicate that steel pipes were used instead of stainless steel pipes. Okay, the auditor speculates that can happen. But the auditor, again, is not an expert. So what does the auditor do? The auditor goes to the country's Department of Roads and Highways and has a conversation, because the pipes were laid alongside a road, on a shoulder of a road. And the Department of Roads and Highways are responsible for the road and the shoulder. And the Department of Highways and Roads was aware of the construction project because permits had to be issued. And so the auditors visited the engineers in the Department of Roads and Highways. And they confirmed the fact that stainless steel pipes are more expensive and last longer than steel pipes. The auditor then picking up or following up on what he was told by the vendor, talked about the X-ray inspection equipment. And they said, the engineers from the Department of Roads and Highways said, we have that equipment. We use it to detect subsurface water because there are a number of water culverts throughout the country. Those culverts sometimes collapse, sometimes they break. The water gets winds up under the road and creates a situation where the roads collapse. So the engineers said they always have to be mindful of water erosion, subsurface water erosion. And so the auditor said, well, could you do us a favor? Could you use that equipment to see whether or not the pipes laid on the westbound side of this road are leaking? And the engineers said, we're not going to do you a favor. That's our responsibility. We're going to do it. And so the engineers said that X-ray equipment and personnel to operate the equipment will be made available to you to see whether there's any subsurface water near or adjacent to the roadway. So what the auditors basically did was tell them that they think the pipes are leaking. The Department of Roads and Highways didn't know that. Now they're concerned. So they're becoming, they're cooperating with the auditors in doing the audit. Okay. The auditors then visited the construction site with an engineer from the government of Department of Roads and Highways and the equipment. And then they used the equipment. They X-rayed the subsurface of the portion of the road shoulder that where the pipes were supposed to have been laid. The equipment produces high-resolution images, and it showed that there was water around the area where the engineering drawings for the placement of the pipes were to have been placed by the contractor. So indeed, scientifically, from an engineering perspective, the pipes appeared to be leaking. There is now evidence the pipes are leaking. In addition, the X-ray showed that there were defective pipe joints and wells. Now, what did the supplier say? The supplier said that stainless steel pipes have to be especially welded, and they can't be welded like steel pipes. Otherwise, they will leak. And the X-ray equipment indicated that the joints and the welds were defective. Okay. Other X-rays taken along the shoulder of the road at random places also disclosed subsurface water. So it wasn't just leaking along one portion of where the pipes were laid. It was leaking at many locations along where the pipes were laid, which meant that many joints were most likely leaking, which means that most likely the steel pipes had been laid rather than the stainless steel pipes. Then the auditor asked the engineers to bring the X-ray equipment to the other side of the road. See if there are pipes on the other side. See if there's any water on the other side. And so the engineers took the equipment to the other side and did an X-ray, subsurface X-ray, and found no pipes. Now remember, the contract said one set of pipes on one side, one set of pipes on the other side. Remember, the contractor returned excavation equipment very early before it was due. Why? Didn't need the excavation equipment for the other side of the road because the other side of the road was not excavated. The contractor didn't need laborers to excavate the other side of the road. Didn't need laborers to lay the pipes for the other side of the road. Okay, so all of that now is coming together. All of it is coming together. The equipment showed defective pipe joints. It showed water at random places on the road. Okay, and there was no subsurface water on the other side of the road. The engineers, now again, the engineers don't know, but the engineers speculated that the cause of the subsurface water, didn't speculate, they confirmed that they're going to have to excavate the site because they can't allow that subsurface water to accumulate. So the Department of Roads and Highways, because of what the contractor has done, is now going to have to excavate and have the pipes repaired because they were leaking and causing a hazard to the road. Is that kind of clear? Is that kind of understood? Okay. All right. Okay. As a result of all of this, and because of the involvement with the Department of Roads and Highways, who found subsurface water adjacent to a road, which is part of their responsibility, they excavated the site. They dug up the site. And what did they find? They found that the potable water and wastewater pipes were placed in the same trench, placed on the same side of the road, which was not in compliance with the contract. Clearly, that's not what the contract said. So the contractor saved time and money and effort by not digging up the other side of the road and not putting a single pipe on the other side of the road. In addition, the contractor saved money by not placing stainless steel pipes in each one of the locations. So what the contractor did was what's called product substitution. They didn't give the government what the government was paying for. Okay, potable water, wastewater pipes, same location, which was not in compliance with the contract. The pipes, after they were excavated, were steel, not stainless steel. Not stainless steel as required by the contract. To make matters worse, the wastewater pipe was placed above the potable water pipe. And so the wastewater pipe was leaking. The wells were deteriorating. The wells on the potable water pipe were deteriorating. Water was accumulating. And so wastewater was leaching into the potable water pipe. And that contaminated water was finding its way into the village. Both pipes were leaking, based on what the engineers said, to what appeared to be poor wells. The engineers also indicated that the wastewater, and the engineers are not biologists or chemists, but they indicated that the wastewater could be contaminating the potable water. Okay, subsequent tests showed that it in fact was. It was in fact leaking in or leaching in to the potable water pipe and being delivered to the village. Okay. What did the auditor conclude? The auditor concluded there was a probability, again, looked like fraud. I hope that the folks watching this are kind of convinced that we have the probability of fraud. I hope you're convinced, okay, because there is more to it to this case than we presented. We could probably spend a week discussing this case. But in the hour we're discussing it, I hope you're convinced. In fact, I hope for both cases you are convinced that the probability of fraud exists. Again, just the probability. Just the probability. Not with certainty, just the probability. And that probable fraud is product substitution. Okay, just to go over some of the evidence that convinced the auditor that there was probable fraud. The auditor found that the contractor did not supply stainless steel pipes as required. Okay, what was the evidence? He didn't buy them. He didn't buy them. The vendor didn't sell them. And when it was excavated, they were steel, not stainless steel. Pretty good evidence that the contract was violated. Okay, the contractor placed potable water and wastewater pipes together on the same side of the road. Is that what the contract said? Absolutely not. Contractor saved a lot of money by excavating one side of the road. A lot of money, because these were, these were very low in terms of mile. I don't know what it's in meters, but in terms of miles, this was a long pipeline. Long pipeline. Saved a lot of money, okay, by laying the pipes on one side of the road. Okay. Do we have evidence of that? We have evidence of that. It's incontrovertibly evidence. Okay. Do we say that all terms and conditions of the contract were not complied with? Absolutely. The contractor did not comply with the contract. But what's worse is that the contractor knew he was not complying. This was not accidental. Oh, I forgot. The contractor knew he was not complying. And what did he do? He billed the government for the agreed upon contract price, certifying that all terms and conditions of the contract have been met. What is kind of interesting, just kind of I don't know, we didn't cover it here in the slides, kind of interesting, when the auditors went to the contractor's location to audit, and they looked at the bills that he paid for procuring pipes, the auditors found that the pipes were steel pipes, and they were certified as being stainless steel, okay, by the contractor. The auditors asked the accountant in the office, and the accountant said, yes, I called his attention to the fact that these were not stainless steel pipes. And he said not to worry, it's all the same. So he knew what he was doing. It wasn't an accident. He knew exactly what he was doing. And the auditors recorded, not tape recorded, but wrote up that interview with the accountant in the accounts payable department. Kind of interesting what she said. Okay. All terms and conditions of the contract were not complied with. The contract, again, knowingly, wasn't a mistake, it wasn't an accident, didn't forget, knowingly billed the government. And the knowingly part was buttressed, was supported by evidence from members of his own organization. And he certified that all the terms and conditions of the contract have been met, and he certified that to things that were not true. So the auditors believed, based on the application of the common law elements used in defining fraud, and we talked about them an hour ago, that all of the elements in the definition were in evidence. Audit work was suspended, and this again is called for in the standards. Audit work was suspended, and consultations with law enforcement officials were initiated. Okay, let's go over these 9 elements again. These are the 9 elements. There must be a representation of fact. I think we have them numbered on the other slide. Okay, number 1, the contractor certified that stainless steel pipes were placed placed apart from each other. Okay, so number 1, there was a representation of fact. That the contractor said that's a fact. Okay, the representation must be false. Okay, the contractor did not place stainless steel pipes, and the pipes were not placed apart from each other. So the representation was false. Number 3, the representation must be material. The contractor used less costly material, less labor, and less machinery. In fact, the auditors determined that the contractor used approximately 1/2 of the materials and supplies and the attendant cost than the contractor said would be required by stainless steel on both sides of the road. Okay. Number 4, the contractor did not do the required work and submitted a false invoice. Number 4, the presenter of the false fact must know it is false. And he knew it was false because his accountant was a woman. His accountant told him it was false, and he said, ignore it. I keep going the wrong way. Sorry. All right. The contractor intended to get paid for the work not performed. Number 5. Okay, the contractor intended to get paid for the work not performed. 5. He intended the false facts to be acted on, which means he intended to get paid. Okay, these are the false facts. I know they're false, but I intend to get paid. Okay, number 6. Okay, 6. Okay, due to poor internal controls, the government did not know of the contractor's failure to perform, right? Remember I said early in our discussion did nothing to inspect the work, did nothing to inspect the finished work, did nothing to see whether or not potable water and clean drinking water and wastewater being properly taken care of. Okay, so the internal controls. The injured party must not know the fact is false. So the government did not know, had no way of knowing because of their laxity and poor controls, had no way of knowing that what the contractor was submitting was false. Number 6. Number 7, the government relied on the contractor to do the work and to submit an honest invoice. So the contractor was relied on. Number 7, the injured party relied on the truth. Injured party relied. The government relied on what the contractor said. Okay. 8, the government has a right to rely on the contractor. Of course they do. They have a contract. Okay. The injured party must have a right to rely on the fact, of course. Number 9, the injured party must suffer a loss as a result of the misrepresentation. Of course, the government paid for construction materials and performance it did not receive. So in the other case, I think only 7 or 8. In this particular case, every one of these 9 elements was complied with, every one. So the auditors used then the collection of as many evidence, many of these 9 elements, and all 9, to conclude with a preponderance of audit evidence. And again, a preponderance of audit evidence is referred to in the audit standards whether the possibility of fraud exists. This was done in strict accordance with the audit standards. Okay. The auditor applying common law criteria for fraud and audit organization protocol. Now, we say common law criteria for fraud. Those are the 9 elements. The audit organization protocol for fraud. What the audit organization protocol for fraud is that each organization must have a way to deal with a disclosure of possible fraud by an auditor. So each audit organization may have a different way. This was not in the United States, so that audit organization had a different protocol than we had in the United States. So, and you have a different protocol, you may have a different protocol in Brazil. Okay, so, but in accordance with the protocol, the auditor consulted with legal counsel. Legal counsel suggested the evidence was overwhelming that the case be referred to law enforcement, to a special prosecutor. The contractor was eventually convicted of fraud against the government. Okay, the investigative agency in that country took over the case. They conducted a thorough investigation, and the contractor was convicted of fraud. Okay. In addition, the auditors recommended significant strengthening of internal control. This never should have happened. The auditors recommended increased training and supervision of procurement personnel. And it was recommended that the government initiate action to recover the monies paid the contractor for work not performed. Okay, but the contractor was eventually taken to court, and the contractor was eventually convicted of fraud, and the contractor was sentenced to jail, prison. Okay, that concludes 2 case studies. I think we're pretty much on time, maybe a few minutes over. I don't know, Olivio, do we have time for questions?
I believe so, Nick.
Okay. Well, if anybody has any questions, I think one of the things I want to stress is why do auditors stop auditing possible fraud? Well, the overwhelming reason is because if they're coming up with a possible case of fraud and they continue to investigate, the individual who they suspect of committing fraud may begin to dispose of evidence, may begin to destroy important evidence. Number 1. Number 2, if the individual who may be committing the fraud sees a prison sentence, they may decide to do harm to the auditor. And so for those 2 very compelling reasons, as soon as the auditor believes that a fraud may have been committed, it should be it should be conferred with, they should confer with legal counsel or investigative agency, and investigators then who are trained to deal with those kinds of possible occurrences, destruction of evidence, and the threat of bodily harm. They're trained to do that, and that's why those cases should be turned over to them. Okay. Why don't we just ask the questions? Yeah.
Please, could you explain in more details about common law criteria for identification of frauds? Is something specific of the engineer or just a common law? A criteria of common law is an example, please, just to understand.
Right. The common law criteria is universally accepted as, from an audit perspective, as an indicator that fraud may have occurred. Auditors need some guidance. Auditors need guidance as to when they should determine, or how they should determine, that a fraud may have occurred. They need guidance. And these 9 elements give the auditors guidance. These 9 elements give the auditors guidance. Now, if a particular country has a different set of elements, that set of elements have to be introduced into the audit standards. They should not differ. They should not differ too much from those 9 elements, because those 9 elements are universally, somebody submits a false document. A false document in Brazil is the same as a false document in Indonesia. Okay. The government of Indonesia relying on a false document is the government of Brazil relying on a false document. So there's essentially nothing in those, not a one of those 9 elements does not apply to any of the 190 countries on the face of the earth. I think there's 190, and so they're universally accepted. In some countries look at them and they say, we don't need that many elements. We just need 4. We just need 5. We just need 3. All we need is number 7 and number 8. So it depends on the country. If Brazil doesn't have those kinds of elements for audit, again, it's for auditors, not for investigators, for auditors. If Brazil doesn't have those 9 elements, Brazil should adopt them, should incorporate them into their audit standards if they haven't already. If they have elements that are better, more encompassing, that are more workable, then they should go into the audit standards. But again, they should not be too much different. It's very hard to see how they could be different. Very hard to see. Did I answer the whole question?
Yes, it
Okay,
was
good.
answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's important for auditors to have guidance. Auditors just can't guess. I think I have fraud here. No, you can't guess that you have fraud. You've got to have compelling evidence. And those 9 elements provide the guidance. They're like a checklist. I think I have fraud. Oh, yeah? How many of the 9 elements do you have? I have 6. All right, let me show it to Livio. What do you think, Livio? Yeah, you got 6. You don't have 9. You have 6. But I think you have compelling evidence that we should discuss it with the law enforcement, with the lawyers, whatever. Maybe after 4. We'll get 40. Yeah, okay, we got it. I think we ought to go over. And you'll see in both of the cases I discussed, there were intervals during the discussion of the case where you can conclude, I think we have fraud here. In discussion of the case, there were intervals where you could have said, yeah, let's go after that. Let's refer that to a special prosecutor or an attorney. Okay. How about the other questions?
Nick, I just want to emphasize that
Yes, sir.
during the training session here in São Paulo, you asked over and over again, what do you think it was? Mismanagement
Yeah.
or fraud?
Right.
So this is a question we should always ask ourselves when we are performing an audit.
Right. If you recall, both cases, we had red flags. Red flags could have led us to fraud or led us to a management deficiency. And so the auditor has a responsibility. In both cases, the auditor had a responsibility to pursue those red flags. Is it just poor internal controls, or is it actually fraud? Very good. That's exactly right. I should have mentioned that when I talked about red flags. Yep. Okay, other questions?
Can the internal control be held accountable since they haven't done their job right?
You raise an interesting, very interesting question about internal controls, and it wasn't evident in these two cases. However, in other cases like that, the person responsible for executing internal controls, because they are conspiring with the contractor to commit fraud, commit what Livio just mentioned, what looks like management deficiencies. And so they're hoping that when the auditors audit, they just think they're management deficiencies and ask the government to take corrective action. So internal control, again, in both cases, the auditors recommended improvements or enhancements in internal control in both cases. Number one. Number two, depending on the organization, people responsible for procurement in either one of those two cases probably should be fired. They should be discharged from their jobs for allowing something like that to happen. Internal controls certainly need to be followed. The internal controls maybe need to be enhanced, or the internal controls are sufficient, but they're not being followed. In some cases, internal controls are being overridden. Now, when somebody overrides internal control,